Hi there, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to a bustling medieval city, but to a place of quiet devotion, hard labor, and surprisingly good food, the medieval monastery. Imagine, for a moment, the chill stone walls, the scent of old parchment and wood smoke, the rhythmic chanting echoing through ancient halls. You're not just a visitor, you're about to experience what it was truly like to live day in and day out as a monk, from the pre-dawn prayers to the frugal evening meal. It's a life that might seem utterly alien to us now, a world away from your cozy bed and streaming services. You probably won't survive this, not with the early mornings and constant silence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in, let me know where you are and what time it is for you in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the arched gateway of a Benedictine monastery, the heavy oak doors imposing, yet somehow inviting. The air is crisp, carrying the distant sound of bells, a sound that will soon become the very heartbeat of your existence. You've heard tales of this life, perhaps from a wandering friar or a local lord. You've pictured the quiet contemplation, the scholarly pursuits, the sense of purpose. But now, as you prepare to step inside, the full weight of your decision begins to settle. This isn't just a career change, it's a complete immersion, a spiritual and physical transformation. The guard at the gate, a lay brother with calloused hands, nods gravely as you approach. He doesn't speak, merely gestures inward. You pass through the heavy doors, and the world as you know it begins to recede. The sounds of the outside world, the creaking cart, the distant chatter of villagers, the bleating of shepard, muffled, replaced by an almost tangible quietude. This is the closure, the enclosed world of the monastery, designed to separate you from worldly distractions and bring you closer to the divine. It's a concept that sounds lovely in theory, but in practice, you might find yourself missing the mundane cacophony of everyday life. Your first impression is of order. Everything seems to have its place. The pathways are swept clean, the hedges neatly trimmed. You see figures moving silently, some with heads bowed in thought, others engaged in quiet tasks. They wear simple, rough-spun tunics and cowls, their heads often tonsured, that distinctive shaved crown that marks them as brethren. It's a powerful visual, immediately setting them apart. Historians still argue whether the tonsure originated as a sign of humility, a practical measure for hygiene, or a symbolic imitation of Christ's crown of thorns. You notice the scent of baking bread mingling with something earthy, like damp stone and old books. It's not unpleasant, rather it's grounding, a sensory anchor in this new reality. You might even catch a whiff of stale lamp oil, a constant companion in the dim corners of the cloisters. This is not a place of luxury, but it is a place of sustenance. You've probably gone to bed hungry more times than you care to count in your former life, so the promise of regular, if simple, food is a silent comfort. Remember that rough, unpredictable existence outside these walls. Consider this an upgrade, in at least one key department, as you walk deeper into the complex. You pass the church, its great stone bulk dominating the central courtyard. You catch a glimpse of stained glass, even in the dim light, casting fragmented colors across the flagstones. This is the heart of the monastery, the place where you will spend countless hours, where the very air vibrates with centuries of prayer. You're about to discover that your new alarm clock won't be the crow of a rooster, but the relentless clang of a bell calling you to early morning services, sometimes in the dead of night. Good luck sleeping through that. It's designed to pull you out of the deepest slumber with the unyielding force of a guilt trip. You might be wondering, why would anyone choose this life? Why voluntarily give up worldly pleasures, family, and personal freedom for a life of strict routine and self-denial? Well, that's precisely what we're going to explore as you settle into your new existence. The motivations were as varied as the monks themselves, a tapestry of piety, desperation, social obligation, and sometimes a shrewd calculation for a secure future. You're about to find out if your own reasons are enough to sustain you through the long, quiet years ahead. Your induction into monastic life isn't a grand ceremony, not yet anyway. It's more of a gentle, persistent nudge towards understanding the monastic calling. You might have arrived here with a heart swelling with piety, a genuine desire to dedicate your life entirely to God. Perhaps you felt a profound spiritual pull, a calling that whispered to you in moments of quiet contemplation, promising a deeper purpose than any worldly pursuit. For some, this was indeed the primary motivator, a sincere belief that through rigorous discipline, prayer, and isolation from the corrupting influences of the outside world, they could achieve salvation and eternal bliss. It was, for many, the ultimate expression of faith in an age deeply rooted in spiritual conviction. But for others, your reasons for being here might be far more pragmatic, even strategic. Consider, for instance, your family. If you're a second or third son of the aristocracy, your options outside these walls were, shall we say, limited. Your elder brother inherited the lands, the titles, and the prestige. You might have been destined for a minor knightly role, a struggling merchant, or perhaps a life of perpetual dependence. Joining the church, and specifically a monastery, offered a respectable career path. It came with the promise of education, a guaranteed roof over your head, and a steady, if simple, food supply, luxuries not to be sneezed at in a time of scarcity and insecurity. You might even harbor ambitions of rising through the ranks, perhaps even becoming an abbot yourself one day, wielding significant power and influence, not just within the monastery but across vast tracts of land. It was, in a way, a medieval corporate ladder, just with more chanting and fewer quarterly reports. Then there's the sheer brutal reality of medieval life. Famine, disease, warfare, these were constant companions in the outside world. The monastery, by contrast, offered a haven, a place of relative safety and stability. While you're expected to live simply with few possessions and attend services at all hours, the immediate benefits of a secure roof over your head and a regular, often superior, food supply are undeniably attractive. Think about it, no more. Worrying about where your next meal comes from, or if some marauding lord will decide your village is ripe for plunder. It's a kind of peace, even if it's a peace purchased with perpetual self-denial. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for entry was spiritual devotion or socio-economic necessity, a debate that highlights the complex motivations at play. Perhaps you were one of the unlucky ones, a child sent here by your parents at a tender age, maybe as young as 5. You're what's known as an oblate. Your parents, for reasons of piety, poverty, or simply to ensure your future, effectively offered you to the monastery. You might not even remember a life outside these walls, this enclosed world being the only home you've ever known. For you, the monastic calling isn't a choice, but a destiny, shaped by the decisions of others. You're too young to understand the theological intricacies, but you quickly learn the rhythm of the bells, the quiet movements of the monks, and the unspoken rules of silence. It's like being sent to an extremely strict boarding school, except your lifelong career path is already mapped out, complete with a distinctive haircut. Or maybe you're a novice, aged 15 or over when you arrived. You've come here with some understanding of the world you're leaving behind, perhaps even a personal crisis or a desperate need for sanctuary. For example, a man who has lost his family to plague might seek solace and purpose within the community, finding healing in prayer and communal life. The discipline, the structure, the clear path to salvation, these could be powerful antidotes to the chaos and grief of a harsh world. You might have seen others come and go during your early life, wondering what drew them to this secluded existence, and now you are here yourself, on the cusp of understanding, regardless of your initial spark, be it divine inspiration, familial obligation, or the grim realities of medieval survival. You are here. And as you begin to shed your former identity, you'll soon learn that the path to becoming a monk is not instantaneous. It's a carefully structured journey, designed to test your resolve, purify your intentions, and ultimately transform you into a true brother of the order. The gateway, as you now understand, wasn't just a physical entrance. It was a portal to a life irrevocably altered. Your journey into the structured life of the monastery begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent echo of history itself. The monastic movement, as you are about to discover, didn't spring fully formed from a single idea. It evolved from the radical simplicity of early hermits and communities. Imagine a barren, sun-baked landscape in 3rd century Egypt or Syria. The air is thick with dust, the sun relentless. Here, you might have found the earliest Christians who felt a deep yearning to escape the perceived corruption and distractions of the world. These were the solitary ascetics, individuals who chose to live alone, often in caves or desolate wildernesses. They believed that by stripping away all material possessions and worldly ties, by enduring physical hardship and incessant prayer, they could achieve a profound understanding of and closeness to God. Their lives were incredibly austere. You'd be subsisting on roots, wild herbs, and perhaps a small ration of bread brought by sympathetic locals. Sleep would be minimal, prayer constant, and the silence only broken by the wind or the cries of desert animals. It was a rigorous path, one that few could endure for long. Think of it as the ultimate spiritual extreme sport, where the only prize is enlightenment. One famous example is Saint Anthony the Great, often considered the father of Christian monasticism, who retreated into the Egyptian desert. His life, recounted by Athanasius, inspired countless others to follow a similar solitary path. It's a testament to human endurance, both physical and spiritual, as these individualists grew in number. And as the challenges of true solitude became apparent, a natural progression began. You might imagine a few hermits, initially living miles apart, gradually moving closer for mutual support, shared protection, or simply the occasional spiritual discussion. These loose gatherings eventually led to the formation of the first communal monastic settlements. Initially, you'd still largely live a solitary life within the community, only coming together for shared religious services. Your meager cell would be your sanctuary, your personal retreat from the world even within the walls. The leader of such an early group was often called an Abba, a Syriac word meaning father. This is, as you might have guessed, the origin of the later title, abbot, that you will soon become intimately familiar with. The individuals themselves were called monachos, in Greek, derived from mono, meaning one or alone, which is where we get the very word monk. So, in essence, you are the lonely one, even when surrounded by others. It's a subtle linguistic nod to the original solitary ideal, a reminder that even in community, your personal spiritual journey is yours alone. Over time, this early form of monasticism began to evolve. The purely solitary existence, even within a shared space, gave way to a more communal attitude. Instead of each monk fending entirely for himself, members began to share the labor needed to keep the community self-sufficient. This meant shared responsibilities for cultivating food, maintaining the buildings, and engaging in crafts. You would share accommodation, likely a communal dormitory, and certainly meals in a common refectory. This shift towards a truly communal life marked a significant development, laying the groundwork for the organized monasticism that would spread across Europe. Historians still argue whether this communal development was primarily driven by practical necessity for survival or a deeper theological understanding of Christian fellowship. One fascinating tidbit from these early communities is their ingenuity. Facing harsh desert environments, they developed remarkable systems for water collection and storage, using ancient Roman aqueduct principles and adapting them to their isolated settlements. It wasn't just about prayer, it was about survival, grit, and innovation. Imagine trying to irrigate fields with only rudimentary tools and the sheer determination of spiritual zeal. It was a far cry from the perfectly manicured gardens you might see in later, wealthier monasteries. So, while you might find yourself longing for a moment of true solitude in your busy new life, remember that it was the very desire for intense, personal, spiritual connection that birthed this entire movement. You are a direct descendant of those intrepid desert dwellers, even if your immediate surroundings are far more ordered and, thankfully, less sandy. Your daily life, structured as it is, carries within it the echoes of those ancient, solitary vows, a continuous thread connecting you to the very beginnings of your calling. Having understood the solitary roots of monasticism, you now find yourself firmly within its more organized, communal iteration, largely thanks to the transformative vision of Saint Benedict of Nursia from the 5th century CE, as the idea of monastic communities spread from the Byzantine Empire into Roman Europe. It wasn't a wild, unstructured growth. Instead, it was shaped and refined by Benedict c. 480 c. 543 CE, whose practical and compassionate approach to monastic life became the bedrock for what you now experience daily. His comprehensive set of guidelines, known simply as the Rule of Saint Benedict, wasn't just a suggestion. It was, and largely remains, the foundational document for Western monasticism, a blueprint for communal living with a spiritual purpose. Benedict's genius lay in creating a balanced and sustainable way of life. Unlike the extreme asceticism of the early desert fathers, which, let's be honest, would have made you a very hungry and dehydrated monk, Benedict understood the need for a structure that was rigorous yet achievable for ordinary men. He didn't demand impossible feats of endurance, but rather consistent devotion and communal effort. His rule encouraged its members to live as simple a life as possible: simple food, basic accommodation, and as few possessions as practical. You'll quickly learn that this simplicity isn't just about deprivation. It's about removing distractions, allowing your focus to shift entirely towards God and your communal obligations. It's a bit like decluttering your mind by decluttering your life, except with fewer trips to the charity shop. The rule itself is a masterwork of organization, covering everything from the election of the abbot to the appropriate times for prayer, work, and sleep. Because all monks in a Benedictine monastery lived the same way, following the same regulations, they became known as brothers. This term isn't just a casual nickname. It signifies a deep bond forged through shared experience, mutual support, and a common adherence to a singular way of life. You're not just a collection of individuals. You're a family, albeit one that practices extreme quietude and often wears matching outfits. While the Benedictine rule provided a strong foundation, it wasn't a static document. Monastic rules differed between the various orders that evolved, from the 11th century CE, and even between individual monasteries within the same order. Some orders, like the Cistercians, formed in 1098 CE by a group of Benedictine monks, sought an even less worldly life. They felt the Benedictine monastery had become too wealthy, too comfortable, and too involved in secular affairs. The Cistercians emphasized even stricter asceticism, manual labor, and a return to the primitive simplicity of the rule. Imagine thinking your current life is too cushy and then opting for an even more rigorous version that takes dedication, or perhaps a serious misunderstanding of leisure. The influence of the Benedictine rule spread like wildfire across Europe. Its balanced approach, combining prayer, study, and manual labor, proved incredibly effective not only for spiritual development but also for the practical functioning of large communities. Monasteries became centers of learning, agriculture, and craftsmanship, acting as beacons of stability and knowledge in an often chaotic medieval world. You might think of it as medieval franchising, but instead of fast food, it was fast salvation. Historians still argue whether Benedict's rule succeeded primarily because of its spiritual depth, or its pragmatic organizational structure. Was it the divine inspiration or the excellent management principles that led to its widespread adoption? Likely, it was a potent combination of both. What is clear, however, is that this framework provided the stability and predictability that allowed monastic life to flourish for centuries. As you begin to settle into your daily rhythm, you'll feel the subtle yet profound impact of Benedict's vision on every aspect of your life. From the moment you rise to the sound of bells, to the quiet hours spent in prayer or labor, you are living a life designed over a millennium ago, a testament to the enduring power of a well-conceived rule. It's a framework that minimizes personal decision-making, allowing you to focus your energy elsewhere, a bit like a medieval life hack for spiritual growth, where all the complex choices are already made for you. Now that you're steeped in the foundational principles of the Benedictine rule, it's time to face the core commitments that bind every monk to this unique way of life. The solemn monastic vows explained. These aren't just polite promises. They are lifelong binding oaths, taken publicly and with profound spiritual weight. When you finally stand before the abbot and your gathered brothers to make your profession, you will be committing to 3 pillars: poverty, chastity, and obedience. It's a bit like signing the most serious contract of your life, but instead of legal jargon, it's all about spiritual renunciation. Let's start with poverty. This isn't just about being a bit frugal. It means absolutely rejecting personal wealth. The Gospel of Matthew 19:21 rings in your ears. If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess, and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. For you, this translates directly into having few possessions of any kind. You don't own the clothes on your back, the pen in your hand, or even the bed you sleep on. Everything you use is communal property belonging to the monastery. If you arrived with any personal wealth or property, it would have been given over to the monastery upon your entry. This radical detachment from material goods is meant to free you from worldly anxieties and distractions, allowing you to focus solely on God. Imagine having no bills, no property taxes, and no shopping. Urgesit sounds oddly liberating, doesn't it? Though perhaps a little dull for your inner medieval shopaholic. Next is chastity. This vow requires you to abstain from all sexual activity and to live a celibate life. This isn't simply about physical restraint. It's about a complete dedication of your heart and soul to God, unencumbered by earthly attachments and desires that might compete with your spiritual devotion. It means living in a state of purity, focusing your love and energy on your divine relationship and your brotherhood within the monastery. In a society where marriage and family were the norm, this was a profound choice, setting monks apart as individuals committed to a higher calling. Historians still argue whether the concept of celibacy in monasticism was initially a practical measure for communal living or a purely spiritual ideal from early Christian asceticism. Finally, there is obedience. This is perhaps the most challenging and pervasive of the vows. You commit to obeying your abbot in all things, as long as they are not contrary to the will of God or the rule. This isn't blind subservience. It's a spiritual exercise in humility and the surrender of your individual will for the good of the community and your own spiritual growth. The abbot's word is law, and his decisions are to be followed without question. This vow extends to your brothers too. You are expected to defer to those in authority and to live harmoniously within the communal structure. If you're used to making your own decisions, this will be a constant, sometimes grating, test of your patience and ego. It's like having a boss who is also your spiritual guide, life coach, and occasional disciplinarian, all rolled into one cowled package. The strict application of these ideals, particularly concerning creature comforts and possessions, varied between monasteries. While the rules set a high bar, some monasteries, especially as they grew in wealth, might have been a little more lenient than others. It's like the difference between a 5-star hotel with minimal decor and a 2-star hostel where you share a toothbrush. Both are simple, but one is decidedly more comfortable. Taking these vows means publicly renouncing your former life. It is a moment of profound significance, a spiritual death and rebirth into the monastic order. Once taken, these vows are considered lifelong and generally irreversible, while rules did develop from the 13th century CE that allowed a youth to freely leave a monastery on reaching maturity. For those who had formally taken their final vows, departure was rare and seen as a grave breach of contract with God. You are, in essence, signing up for the duration until your very last breath. This commitment is what transforms you from a mere visitor or novice into a full, consecrated brother. With the heavy weight of those lifelong vows now firmly understood, you realize your entry into the monastery wasn't immediate immersion. Instead, you face a period of intensive preparation, a kind of spiritual boot camp known as life as an oblate novice. This isn't a gentle introduction. It's a rigorous testing ground designed to assess your suitability, your dedication, and your ability to adapt to the unique rhythms and demands of monastic life. If you were sent here as a child, perhaps as young as 5 or 6, you entered as an oblate. For you, this monastery is your childhood home. You don't have memories of a bustling market square or a family farm. Your world is defined by these stone walls, the tolling bells, and the quiet presence of the monks. As an oblate, you wouldn't have mixed freely with the full monks. Instead, you'd have your own designated areas, often under the direct supervision of a senior monk who served as your teacher and guardian. Your days would be filled with learning basic literacy, arithmetic, and crucially, Latin, the language of scripture, liturgy, and scholarship. Think of it as a medieval elementary school, but with mandatory chanting and no recess in the traditional sense. You learn to read from large, heavy manuscripts, your young fingers tracing the ancient script, your mind slowly opening to a world of knowledge preserved within these very walls. It's a very different childhood from chasing chickens in a village. I'll give you that. If you arrived as a teenager or adult, aged 15 or over, you entered as a novice. This period is typically a year long, though it could vary. For you, the transition is more abrupt. You've known the outside world, with its loud noises, its varied comforts, and its often brutal freedoms. Now, you're stripping all that away. The novice period is a time of intense discernment, both for you and for the community. You are tested, observed, and instructed in every aspect of monastic life. You learn the rule of Saint Benedict, commit to memory the various prayers and chants, and begin to participate in the daily tasks, albeit often the most menial ones. You might spend hours in the fields, alongside lay brothers, or scrubbing pots in the kitchen. It's less about doing it perfectly and more about demonstrating humility and willingness. Neither oblates nor novices were ever permitted to be alone. This wasn't just for safety. It was to ensure constant supervision and to foster a sense of communal belonging from the very beginning. You'd always be accompanied by a monk or an older novice. This constant companionship, even in silence, reinforces the idea that you are no longer an individual acting solely for yourself, but a part of a larger body. It's like being perpetually chaperoned, which, depending on your personality, might either be reassuringly structured or mildly maddening. Your instruction as a novice would include learning the gestures monks used to communicate in silent areas, a kind of monastic sign language. Imagine trying to express a complex thought, like Brother Thomas. Could you please pass the parchment and ink, but only the good quality, not the runny stuff, using only hand signals? It required precision and a good memory. Sometimes, if a direct communication was needed in a forbidden silent zone, monks might even whistle a specific tune to catch attention rather than speak aloud. It's a quirky tidbit that reveals the depth of their commitment to silence. The novice master, a seasoned monk, would be your guide and mentor. He would observe your temperament, your piety, your diligence, and your capacity for obedience. He wouldn't shy away from pointing out your failings, seeing them as opportunities for spiritual growth. There's no sugarcoating here. Your every action is scrutinized. Historians still argue whether the rigor of the novice period served primarily to filter out the uncommitted or to instill profound spiritual discipline. Regardless of prior inclination, at the end of your year as a novice, you would face the most significant decision of your life, to take your full vows and become a professed monk, a full brother. This was not always an irreversible career choice. From the 13th century CE, rules developed that a youth could freely leave a monastery on reaching maturity if they had not yet taken final vows. But once that final profession was made, the commitment was meant to be for life. Your training period is the crucible in which your future is forged, transforming you from an outsider into a true member of this unique, timeless community. Having navigated the rigorous probationary period, you are now officially a professed monk, a full brother within the community, and the very first thing you learn to truly internalize is the unrelenting rhythm of the daily schedule. Dawn to dusk. Your life is now governed by the horarium, a meticulously planned timetable centered around the 8 monastic offices, or prayer services, that punctuate every single day and night. Forget the concept of sleeping in or a leisurely morning. Your existence is now dictated by the bell, which rings with an authority that transcends any earthly command. Your day doesn't begin with an alarm clock, but with the chilling clang of the monastery bell, typically around 2 or 3 a.m. Yes, you heard that right. While the rest of the world, those lucky 80% living outside monastery walls, that is deep in slumber, you're roused from your straw or feather mattress. This pre-dawn rising is for nocturnes, also known as matins and lords, the first and second divine offices. You trudge from the communal dormitory to the unheated church, the cold stone floor a stark reminder of your vows. In the dim light of lanterns, or sometimes just by the pale moonlight filtering through narrow windows, you join your brothers in chanting psalms and prayers, the sound filling the cavernous space, to ensure no one is dozing off in the gloom. One brother would walk through the choir, checking with a lamper, very effective deterrent for any sleepyhead. After these early services, there might be a short return to bed, or in winter you might stay up to perform personal tasks like mending clothes or fixing minor items. Then, as the first hint of dawn breaks, or around 4:30 a.m. in summer and a luxurious 7:30 a.m. in winter depending on the light, as artificial light was a precious commodity, your day truly begins. A quick wash, which might just involve splashing cold water on your face, and then an hour or so of silent work. This often means private prayers, reading the sacred texts assigned by your superior, or the incredibly laborious process of copying a specific book. Imagine spending months, perhaps even a year, meticulously hand-copying a single manuscript, every stroke of the quill deliberate. It demands an extraordinary level of focus and patience. Next comes the morning Mass, a central part of your daily spiritual nourishment. Following this, everyone gathers for the chapter meeting. This is where the monastery's important business is discussed. It might involve assigning tasks, addressing issues among the brothers, or even confessing minor infractions. It's a moment of communal accountability and decision-making, where the abbot presides. You learn quickly that speaking out of turn or questioning authority here is not advisable. Another working period follows, which could be anything from physical labor in the fields, especially if there aren't enough lay brothers to handle it, to more sedentary tasks like gardening, cooking, or laundry. Remember, the monastery aims for self-sufficiency, so everyone contributes. At midday, there's another Mass, the High Mass, followed by the most important meal of the day. This isn't just about satisfying hunger. It's a communal event, often accompanied by silent reading from a spiritual text. The afternoon is spent in work again, ending around 4:30 p.m. in winter. In summer, there's often a supper around 6 p.m., followed by more work. Monks generally go to bed early, just after 6 p.m. in winter or 8 p.m. in summer. Sleep, as you've gathered, is fragmented and deeply integrated into the monastic rhythm. It's a routine designed not for comfort, but for constant spiritual vigilance and productive labor. Historians still argue whether the precise timing of These services was more influenced by astronomical observation or practical agricultural needs. One quirky tidbit: your internal clock will recalibrate with astonishing speed. That early morning wake-up call that initially felt like a cruel joke will, over time, become strangely natural. Your body adapts to the monastic rhythm, a testament to the power of routine and collective discipline. It's a profound shift from a life dictated by personal desire to one governed by the shared pursuit of salvation. And while you might occasionally dream of a full 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, you'll find a certain peace in this structured, unyielding devotion. The relentless rhythm of your day, as you've keenly felt, is orchestrated by the divine office unveiled. This isn't just a casual prayer here and there. It's a meticulously structured cycle of communal prayers and liturgy, sung or recited at specific hours throughout the day and night. For a medieval monk like you, these 7 or sometimes 8 daily services, known as the canonical hours, are the very backbone of your spiritual life, the pulse of the monastery. They are designed to sanctify every moment, ensuring that your thoughts are constantly turned towards God. Let's break down this liturgical marathon. You already know about nocturnes matins, that rather rude awakening around 2 or 3 a.m. This is often the longest and most solemn service. Conducted in near darkness, the chanting a low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate through the very stones of the church. It typically includes a significant number of psalms, readings from scripture, and sometimes commentaries by church fathers. Think of it as your deep dive into spiritual texts before the sun even contemplates rising. Immediately following nocturnes, or sometimes merged with it, is Lauds, which marks the break of day. Its hymns and psalms are often joyful, reflecting the rising sun and the new day's promise. It's a moment of collective gratitude as the monastery awakens. Then, a few hours later, usually at the first hour of daylight around 6 a.m., comes Prime. This is a short service that officially marks the beginning of the working day. A prayer for blessing over the day's labor. It's a bit like a spiritual punch-in clock, but far more profound. Next, our terce at the 3rd hour, around 9 a.m., and sext at the 6th hour, noon. These mid-morning and midday services are brief, often focusing on themes related to the Holy Spirit and the crucifixion, respectively. They act as pauses in your work, brief opportunities to refocus and reaffirm your spiritual commitment before returning to your tasks. Imagine stopping whatever manual labor you're doing, no matter how dirty or arduous, to wash up briefly and participate in a short, solemn service. It keeps you mindful as the afternoon progresses. You attend none at the 9th hour, around 3 p.m. This service often commemorates the hour of Christ's death and is another quiet pause before the evening. It's a moment for reflection as the day begins to wane. Then comes Vespers, the evening prayer, usually celebrated as dusk falls around 4:30 p.m. in winter, 6 p.m. in summer. This is a significant service, often featuring the singing of the Magnificat, Mary's Song of Praise, and the lighting of lamps. It's a beautiful, atmospheric end to the main working day, preparing you for rest. Finally, just before bedtime, there's This is the last service of the day, a prayer for protection through the night. It's short, reflective, and typically includes a communal confession of sins and a prayer for peaceful sleep. After Compline, the great silence falls upon the monastery, broken only by the sounds of sleep and the occasional rustle of a restless brother. No talking, no unnecessary movement, just profound quiet until the bell tolls again for nocturnes. This entire cycle, The divine office means you spend a significant portion of your day's several hours, in fact, in communal prayer. The sheer volume of psalms and hymns you commit to memory is astounding. It's like having an entire library of sacred texts memorized. Historians still argue whether the complexity of the medieval divine office was fully understood by all monks, or if it became a rote exercise for many, highlighting the tension between spiritual depth and practical adherence. One quirky tidbit: the monks in the choir stalls often had individual, tiny shelves or pegs for their books, allowing them to follow along even in the dim light. Imagine trying to read intricate Latin script by the flickering glow of a single candle, or perhaps the moon if you were lucky. It made for excellent vision practice, or at least provided a good reason for blurry eyes. This isn't just a schedule. It's a living liturgy designed to immerse you in prayer and scripture, creating a constant dialogue with the divine. Every chime of the bell, every chanted word, reinforces your commitment to God and your brotherhood, reminding you that your life is no longer your own, but a dedicated offering. As the divine office structures your spiritual life, another profound activity dominates your working hours, particularly if you're deemed capable and pious enough: the scriptorium's sacred silence. Imagine a large, airy room, often located near the library, filled with a hushed reverence that rivals the church itself. This is the scriptorium, the beating heart of intellectual and artistic endeavor within the monastery, and it is where you might spend countless hours engaged in the meticulous art of copying manuscripts. The air in the scriptorium is cool, sometimes damp, and always still. You sit at a wooden desk, angled to catch the best natural light from the narrow windows, which are often covered with translucent parchment or horn to diffuse the glare. Before you lies a stack of blank parchment, prepared animal skins, usually calf, sheep, or goat, painstakingly scraped, stretched, and polished to create a smooth, durable writing surface. This material is incredibly expensive, a testament to the value of the texts you are about to reproduce. One slight error, one slip of the quill, and a whole sheet might be ruined. No pressure, right? It's a far cry from the disposable paper you're probably used to in your own time. Your tools are simple but precise: a quill pen, typically made from a goose feather, sharpened to a fine point with a small knife; an inkhorn filled with black ink, often made from gallnuts and iron, salts; and a ruler and lead point or stylus for drawing faint lines to guide your script. You work from a master copy placed on a stand, your eyes constantly moving between the original and your own page. The work is slow, painstaking, and requires absolute concentration. Every letter must be formed perfectly, every word copied exactly. It's like being a human printing press, but with vastly more room for human error and much slower output. Silence is paramount in the scriptorium, broken only by the scratching of quills, the rustle of parchment, and the occasional cough. Talking is strictly forbidden, as even a whisper could break a brother's concentration and lead to a costly mistake. You learn to communicate your needs through a system of subtle gestures, perhaps pointing to an empty inkpot or indicating a desire for a fresh sheet of parchment. It's a silent ballet of diligence. You'll quickly develop an intense focus, a sort of meditative state as you lose yourself in the rhythm of copying. The texts you copy are varied. Many are sacred scriptures, Bibles, Gospels, Psalters. Others are liturgical books for services or commentaries by church fathers. But you might also copy classical Latin texts, works of history, philosophy, or even early scientific treatises. Monasteries were the primary preservers of knowledge during the Middle Ages, acting as libraries and copying centers that ensured the survival of ancient wisdom. Without the monks in the scriptorium, countless texts would have been lost to history. Historians still argue whether the selection of texts copied was primarily driven by spiritual utility or a broader desire to preserve. Classical knowledge, the work is not without its physical demands. Hours spent hunched over a desk can lead to back pain, eye strain from the dim light, and cramped hands. Your fingers might ache from gripping the quill, and your eyes burn from scrutinizing tiny script for hours on end. But there's a profound sense of purpose in the work. You are not just copying words, you are preserving knowledge, disseminating truth, and contributing to the spiritual life of the community and, indeed, to the future. It's a silent, humble form of heroism. One quirky tidbit: some monastic scribes would occasionally hide small, sometimes humorous, or even slightly grumpy notes in the margins of their manuscripts, known as colophines. These might be complaints about the cold, the poor ink, or simply expressions of relief that a long book was finally finished. Imagine the monk, after months of painstaking labor, adding a tiny, almost invisible doodle of himself, stretching, or a little note saying, "Thank God, it's done." It's a delightful peek into the very human side of these dedicated copyists. This meticulous work in the scriptorium laid the foundation for the explosion of knowledge that would come centuries later, a quiet testament to the monks' enduring intellectual contribution. From the stark simplicity of ink on parchment, your eye is now drawn to bursts of vibrant color and shimmering gold. This is the magical world of illuminated artistry, colors and gold, an exquisite complement to the textual work in the scriptorium. Not all monks were scribes, and fewer still were illuminators, but those with the talent were entrusted with adding beauty and richness to the sacred texts, transforming a mere book into a breathtaking work of art. Imagine yourself in a corner of the scriptorium, or perhaps a dedicated workshop nearby, where the light is carefully managed. The tools here are different: fine brushes made from squirrel or sable hair, small pots of ground pigments, and delicate sheets of gold leaf. The pigments themselves are wonders of medieval ingenuity, derived from natural sources: deep blues from lapis lazuli, imported at great cost, vibrant reds from insects, rich greens from plants, and earth tones from various minerals. Mixing these into stable, vibrant paints was an art in itself, often involving egg yolk as a binder. It was like a medieval chemistry lab, but instead of explosions, you aimed for luminous beauty. Your task, if you are skilled enough to be an illuminator, is to bring the text to life. This might involve creating elaborate initials, the first letter of a chapter or section, often enlarged and intricately decorated with intertwining patterns, mythical beasts, or miniature scenes. Or you might be tasked with full-page miniatures, illustrative paintings that depict biblical scenes, saints' lives, or important events. These are not just pretty pictures, they serve a dual purpose. They act as visual aids for the largely illiterate population, conveying complex religious narratives through imagery, and they elevate the sacred text to an object of profound reverence and beauty. It's like creating a medieval graphic novel, but each page takes weeks, if not months. The use of gold leaf is perhaps the most striking element of illumination. Applying gold is a delicate process. First, a special adhesive, often made from gesso, a mixture of plaster, chalk, and glue, or even garlic juice, is laid down in the desired pattern. Then, the incredibly thin sheets of gold leaf, so fine they can flutter away with a single breath, are carefully pressed onto the adhesive. Once dry, the gold is burnished with a smooth stone or a piece of polished bone, creating that dazzling, mirror-like sheen that catches the light and makes the page truly illuminated. This process gives the manuscript an almost ethereal glow, a constant reminder of the divine light. Historians still argue about the precise techniques used to achieve some of the most intricate gold work, a testament to the lost secrets of these medieval artisans. The themes of these illuminations are overwhelmingly religious. You'll see images of Christ in majesty, the Virgin Mary, various saints, scenes from the Gospels, or depictions of the Last Judgment. But occasionally, a quirky or fringe tidbit slips in. Look closely at the margins of some manuscripts, and you might find drolleries, small, often humorous or grotesque figures that have nothing to do with the main text. These could be hybrid creatures, animals dressed as humans, or even satirical caricatures. Was it a moment of artistic rebellion? A way to alleviate the monotony, or perhaps a subtle commentary on the world outside? Nobody knows for sure, but they offer a delightful glimpse into the more playful, less solemn side of monastic life. Imagine a monk, after painstakingly drawing a saint, adding a tiny snail riding a dog in the bottom corner, pure medieval mischief. The creation of an illuminated manuscript was a monumental undertaking, often the work of several monks specializing in different aspects, one copying the text, another preparing the pigments, a third doing the initial sketches, and a fourth applying the gold and final colors. A single large, richly illuminated Bible could take years to complete, involving the labor of an entire monastic community. These books were not just for reading. They were symbols of the monastery's wealth, piety, and scholarly prowess. They were precious objects, sometimes even locked away for safekeeping, brought out only for special occasions. When you hold a finished, illuminated manuscript in your hands, you don't just see a book. You see centuries of dedication, artistry, and faith. You see the countless hours spent by your brothers, the meticulous attention to detail, and the profound belief that every effort, even the artistic, was an act of worship. It's a legacy that has endured far beyond the medieval age, providing invaluable records and a stunning glimpse into the artistic soul of your time. Stepping away from the delicate artistry of the scriptorium, you are pulled towards the fundamental, earthy reality that underpins all monastic life, agricultural life, fields, and farms. For centuries, monasteries were not just centers of prayer and learning. They were immense agricultural enterprises, self-sufficient communities that fed themselves and often the surrounding population. You might find yourself working alongside your brothers under the vast medieval sky, a stark contrast to the quiet, indoor work of copying texts. Monasteries often owned vast estates, sometimes granted by kings or wealthy patrons seeking spiritual merit, or acquired through centuries of careful management and donation. These lands ranged from fertile, arable fields to pastures for livestock, vineyards, and even forests. The very survival of the monastic community depended on the successful cultivation of these lands and the prudent management of their resources. So, while your spiritual nourishment comes from prayer, your physical nourishment comes directly from the soil. Your day in the fields would begin early, often after the morning services. You'd don a simpler, more robust tunic, perhaps with a sturdy apron, and head out with your tools. Depending on the season, your tasks would vary greatly. In spring, you'd be involved in ploughing the heavy earth, a laborious task often done with oxen, preparing the soil for planting. Then came the sowing of seeds, wheat for bread, barley for ale, oats for livestock, and various legumes and vegetables for the monastic diet. This wasn't precision farming as you might know it. It was back-breaking work, relying on brute strength, and traditional knowledge passed down through generations. Summer brought the intense work of weeding, ensuring the precious crops weren't choked by wild growth, and then the crucial harvest. Imagine the entire community, monks and lay brothers alike, toiling under the hot sun, swinging scythes to cut down the ripened grain. The air would be thick with dust and the smell of cut straw. Threshing the grain, separating the edible kernels from the chaff, was another dusty, arduous process. This was a time of immense collective effort, as the success of the harvest directly impacted the monastery's survival through the coming year. It's a kind of stress farming, where your caloric intake depends on your elbow grease. Beyond the staple crops, you'd also be involved in managing the monastery's livestock. This meant tending to cattle for milk and cheese and occasional meat, sheep for wool and mutton, and pigs that foraged in the nearby woods. Monasteries were often renowned for their high-quality wool, which could be sold or traded. And let's not forget the monastery garden, usually a more contained, ordered space where herbs for medicine and cooking, as well as fruits and vegetables, were grown with meticulous care. This was often overseen by the gardener monk, a specialist whose knowledge of plants was invaluable, while many of the heaviest tasks might eventually be handled by lay brothers, hired laborers, or serfs unfree laborers tied to the land. Particularly, as monasteries grew wealthier, you, as a monk, would still participate in manual labor. This was not just a practical necessity, but also a spiritual discipline, a form of penance and humility. The Benedictine rule emphasizes the importance of manual labor, reminding monks that idleness is the enemy of the soul. So, even if you're a former aristocrat, you'd still find yourself with dirt under your fingernails, which is quite the fringe tidbit considering your previous life. Historians still argue whether the agricultural innovations developed by medieval monasteries, such as improved crop rotation or water management techniques, were primarily driven by spiritual self-sufficiency or by a more worldly desire for economic efficiency and surplus. What is clear, however, is their profound impact on the landscape and agricultural practices of medieval Europe. The sheer scale and organization of monastic farms were often far superior to those of individual peasants or even smaller noble estates. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and feel the satisfying ache in your muscles, you understand that the bread you eat, the ale you drink, and the wool for your habit are all direct products of your community's collective toil. This connection to the land, this tangible result of your labor, grounds you in a very real way, reminding you that prayer and study are balanced by the essential, life-sustaining work of the earth. Beyond the fields and the scriptorium, your monastery functions as a complex economic entity, demonstrating the intricate workings of self-sufficiency and economy. Monasteries weren't just spiritual retreats, they were powerful economic engines. Mini-kingdoms managing vast resources and intricate financial affairs in an age without central banks or digital transfers. You'll quickly learn that while you personally embrace poverty, the institution you belong to is anything but poor. The primary source of a monastery's income was the land it owned. These lands, as you now know, were either granted by wealthy patrons seeking spiritual merit or purchased over centuries. The produce from these lands, grain, wool, wine, cheese, timber, and sometimes even valuable minerals formed the backbone of the monastery's wealth. Imagine a modern corporation, but instead of selling gadgets, you're selling sheep. The goal was not just to feed the monks, but to generate a surplus that could be sold or traded in local markets, providing ready cash or other goods the monastery couldn't produce itself. Monasteries were often exempt from certain taxes due to their charitable and religious functions, a significant advantage in an era of heavy feudal levies. This tax relief, combined with consistent donations from pious individuals, further swelled their coffers. Wealthy families might donate land, livestock, or even valuable relics in exchange for prayers for their souls, or the promise of a burial within the monastery's sacred grounds. It was a spiritual investment, ensuring their afterlife was as comfortable as their current one. Beyond agricultural output, monasteries engaged in various crafts and manufacturing. You might find monks brewing their own ale or wine, not just for consumption within the monastery but for sale. Some monasteries were famous for their quality beer or wine, becoming early examples of recognized brands. Others engaged in tanning leather, milling flour, or even producing specialized items like high-quality parchment and illuminated manuscripts, which, as you've experienced, were extremely valuable. These activities not only provided goods for internal use, but also generated additional income. It's like having multiple revenue streams, except instead of passive income from real estate, it's active income from making cheese. The monastery also functioned as a kind of bank. With its secure buildings and reputation for stability, it often served as a safe place for local nobles and merchants to store valuables or even conduct financial transactions. Monks, with their literacy and organizational skills, could act as scribes for legal documents, witnesses to agreements, and even arbitrators in disputes. This added another layer to their economic influence, turning them into trusted intermediaries in a world often lacking formal financial institutions. Managing this complex economy was the responsibility of the abbot and his senior officers, particularly the cellarer, who oversaw the monastery's supplies, food, and often its external economic dealings. These positions required not just piety, but sharp administrative and business acumen. They had to balance the spiritual needs of the community with the practical demands of managing a large, self-sustaining enterprise. Historians still argue about the extent to which monastic economic success was due to their spiritual mission or simply superior managerial practices compared to secular lords. One quirky tidbit about monastic economics is their innovative use of fish ponds given the strict rules about not eating meat on certain days, especially during Lent. Monasteries often constructed elaborate systems of fish ponds to ensure a consistent supply of fresh fish. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were often sophisticated, interconnected ponds designed to raise different types of fish and regulate water flow. It's a testament to their long-term planning and ingenuity, transforming a dietary restriction into a sustainable food source, and sometimes a lucrative surplus for sale. Imagine planning your protein intake literally years in advance. So, while your personal possessions might fit in a small satchel, the institution you belong to is a major economic force, a powerful landowner, producer, and often financier within the medieval landscape. Your daily labors, whether in the fields or the scriptorium, contribute to this vast, integrated system, ensuring the survival and prosperity of your monastic home. As you settle deeper into the monastic rhythm, one aspect of daily life quickly becomes profoundly evident: the food and fasting regimen. Unlike the vast majority of the medieval population, you, as a monk, do not have to worry about going hungry, or the stark seasonal variations that plague others. You are guaranteed a regular food supply, often of a much higher standard than what most peasants could ever dream of. However, this doesn't mean a life of gluttony. Your consumption is strictly limited by the rules of asceticism specific to your monastery and order. It's a delicate balance between survival and spiritual discipline. Your meals are typically taken in the refectory, a communal dining hall. Silence is generally observed, with one monk often reading aloud from a religious text during the meal, transforming eating into another form of spiritual nourishment. This prevents idle chatter and encourages reflection, though you might occasionally wish for just 5 minutes of gossip about Brother Thomas's questionable chanting. Let's talk about the food itself. In all monasteries, there was never a shortage of bread, the absolute staple of your diet. It's often a hearty, dark loaf, baked fresh in the monastic ovens. You'll also have an abundance of fish and seafood, a crucial protein source given the frequent restrictions on meat. Think various freshwater fish from the monastery's own ponds or rivers, and salted sea fish if you're near the coast or have good trade routes. Along with this, you can expect plenty of grains, often in porridges or stews. A wide variety of vegetables from the monastic garden, of course, fruit seasonal, though some dried or preserved eggs and cheese. For beverages, there was always plenty of wine and ale, which were often safer to drink than water in the medieval period due to contamination concerns. Your pint of ale is far more exciting than anything you'll see outside these walls. The strictness regarding meat consumption varied significantly. In stricter monasteries, like those following the Cistercian ideal, meat was generally not eaten at all, except by the sick in the infirmary or on very specific, rare feast days. These monks embraced a very austere diet as part of their vows of poverty and self-denial. Imagine going weeks, even months, without a single bite of pork or chicken. It's a testament to their dedication, or perhaps just a strong craving for fish. However, those monasteries with more generous rules allowed such meats as pork, rabbit, hare, chicken, and game birds to appear on the communal dinner table more often. These might still be reserved for certain days of the week or special feast days, but their presence made for a more varied and perhaps more appealing diet. The specific rules were often enshrined in the monastery's customaries, which elaborated on the Benedictine rule. Historians still argue about the exact interpretation of meat in some monastic rules, with some suggesting that certain fowl or even specific types of fish might have been considered exceptions. Your meal schedule also depended on the season. Monks typically had one main meal a day in winter when the days were short and agricultural work was less demanding. In summer, with longer days and more strenuous labor in the fields, you would typically have 2 meals a day. This adaptability shows a practical consideration for energy levels. Even within a spiritually rigid framework, despite the restrictions, the quality and consistency of the food within the monastery were a remarkable privilege. While the average peasant often faced starvation or subsisted on a monotonous diet, you are well fed, your nutritional needs generally met. This secure food supply was a major draw for many who entered monastic life, a constant reminder of the tangible benefits of your spiritual commitment. It was, in its own way, a very comfortable form of poverty, a kind of VIP access to the medieval larder. One quirky tidbit: some monastic kitchens were surprisingly sophisticated, with large ovens, specialized cooking implements, and even early forms of refrigeration, like underground larders or ice houses, were available. The head cook, often a lay brother or a monk, was a highly valued member of the community, responsible for managing vast stores and preparing meals for dozens, if not hundreds, of people daily. Their skills ensured not only sustenance, but also, when the rules allowed, a surprisingly diverse culinary experience. Having adjusted to the monastic diet, your attention naturally turns to your personal presentation, or rather, the deliberate lack thereof. Your appearance is meticulously regulated, from your haircut to your footwear, defining your dress and grooming. This isn't about fashion, it's about humility, uniformity, and a constant visual reminder of your vows and separation from the secular world. The most distinctive feature of a monk's grooming is the tonsure. You've seen it on every other monk, and now it's yours too. The top of your head shaved clean, leaving a distinctive band of hair just above the ears. This wasn't merely a stylistic choice. It was a powerful symbol. It represented humility, a renunciation of worldly vanity, and an imitation of Christ's crown of thorns. For some, it symbolized a symbolic crown of thorns worn in imitation of Christ. Getting your tonsure renewed was a regular, if slightly awkward, event, often done by a barber monk. Imagine having to endure that close shave with medieval tools. You can probably feel the phantom nicks already. Historians still argue whether the tonsure's origin was truly symbolic or simply a practical measure for hygiene. Among large groups of men, in contrast to your very open scalp, your clothes are designed to cover as much flesh as possible, emphasizing modesty and a lack of individuality. Most monks wear linen underclothes next to the skin, which would be laundered periodically. Over these, you might have hose or socks for warmth, though these were often simple and utilitarian. The main garment is a simple woolen tunic, a long, loose-fitting gown tied at the waist by a leather belt. This tunic is made from the cheapest and roughest of cloth, often undyed or dyed in muted, earthy tones like brown or grey. Comfort is not a priority. Durability and simplicity are. It's a bit like wearing a potato sack, but surprisingly warm in winter. Over the tunic, you wear your most recognizable item of clothing, the cowl. A monastic cowl is a long, sleeveless robe with a deep hood. This voluminous garment is worn over everything else, providing an additional layer of warmth and a sense of enclosure. On top of the cowl, another robe with long sleeves might be worn, particularly in colder climates or during the winter months. In the deepest cold of winter, an extra layer of warmth might be provided by a sheepskin cloak, a truly luxurious item compared to the usual rough wool. You are permitted no more than 2 of each clothing item, 2 tunics, 2 cowls, etc. This limitation reinforces your vow of poverty and prevents any attachment to personal possessions. You receive a new cowl and robe each Christmas, a small annual indulgence that provides a moment of fresh comfort amidst the otherwise unchanging routine. Imagine the joy of receiving a brand new, slightly less scratchy habit once a year. It's the medieval equivalent of new pajamas. Footwear is typically simple leather sandals or sturdy shoes, designed for durability and practicality rather than elegance. In colder weather, you might have heavier boots. Your other possessions are equally minimal, perhaps a pen, a small knife for sharpening your quill or simple tasks, a handkerchief, a comb, and a small sewing kit for minor repairs to your simple garments. Razors are not personal items. They are distributed at prescribed times for shaving, emphasizing communal living and the absence of individual vanity. This uniform dress code serves several purposes. It eradicates social distinctions, as rich and poor, noble and commoner, all wear the same simple habit. It fosters a sense of brotherhood and collective identity, visually reinforcing that you are all equal in the eyes of God and the order. It also discourages vanity and worldly attachment, constantly reminding you of your vows. As you pull on your rough woolen habit each morning, you're not just getting dressed, you're reaffirming your commitment to a life of humility and devotion. Historians still debate whether the specific colors and styles of habits that evolved for different orders primarily served practical purposes or were chosen for symbolic theological reasons. Now that you're properly dressed and tonsured, it's time to confront the most powerful figure in your monastic world, the abbot's absolute authority. He is not merely a manager, he is the spiritual father, the ultimate decision-maker, and the unquestioned ruler of your monastery. His power is almost absolute, and his word, within the bounds of the rule, is law. You likely first encountered the abbot when you sought entry, or perhaps he presided over your formal profession of vows. He is chosen by the senior monks of the community, usually for life, health permitting. This lifetime appointment provides immense stability to the monastery, allowing for long-term planning and consistent leadership. Interestingly, the choice isn't always for the oldest or wisest monk. Sometimes, a monk in his 20s might be selected precisely because he could hold the office for decades and thus provide an unbroken line of governance. Imagine being put in charge of hundreds of people and vast lands when you're barely out of your teens. That's a serious amount of responsibility. The abbot presides over all aspects of monastic life. He interprets the rule, manages the monastery's vast lands and finances, oversees the spiritual welfare of every single monk, and represents the community to the outside world. When dealing with secular authorities, like kings or powerful nobles, the abbot of a major monastery ranked alongside the most powerful secular landowners. He was a lord in his own right, wielding significant political and economic influence, a far cry from the humble monk you see performing daily tasks. This dual role, spiritual leader and temporal lord, was a constant balancing act. While the abbot is supposed to consult the senior monks on matters of policy, he ultimately has the power to ignore their advice. This doesn't mean he rules as a tyrant, though some certainly did. A wise abbot knows the value of counsel and the importance of maintaining harmony within the community. But the final decision rests solely with him. You, as a monk, are expected to show profound reverence for the abbot. This means bowing deeply in his presence, kissing his hand as a sign of respect, and never questioning his authority in public. It's a bit like having a benevolent dictator, except his primary concern is your eternal soul, his living quarters, while still humble by secular noble standards, are often more comfortable than the communal dormitories you share. He might have a private study, a separate bedchamber, and perhaps a small retinue of servants or younger monks attending to his needs. This slightly elevated status reflects his immense responsibilities and the need for a quiet space for contemplation and administration. For the community, a good abbot is essential. He provides spiritual guidance, ensures the monastery's economic stability, and maintains discipline. An effective abbot can lead his monastery to great prosperity and renown, attracting new recruits and patrons. Conversely, a weak or corrupt abbot could lead to decline, internal strife, and even scandal. Historians still argue whether the absolute power of the abbot was more prone to spiritual abuse or essential for maintaining order and discipline in large monastic communities. One quirky tidbit: the abbot was not merely a figure of authority within the walls. If he traveled, he would do so with a retinue, signifying his status. He would be received with honor by secular lords and bishops, highlighting the significant social and political role monasteries played in medieval society. Imagine your boss being treated like a head of state every time he leaves the office. It speaks volumes about the power of the church and its institutions. Ultimately, your life as a monk is lived under the abbot's watchful eye and guiding hand. His decisions, his interpretations of the rule, and his spiritual example shape your everyday, influencing not just your actions, but your very path to salvation. You might sometimes grumble about his decisions, perhaps in the quiet confines of your own mind, but publicly, your obedience is absolute, a constant test of your humility and commitment to your vows. Beneath the abbot's encompassing authority, a complex network of roles and responsibilities ensures the smooth functioning of the monastery. You'll soon become familiar with the prior and obedientaries, the crucial administrative support team who are the abbot's eyes, ears, and hands, ensuring his will is carried out across the vast monastic complex. Think of them as the executive board, meticulously managing the day-to-day operations while you're busy chanting or toiling in the fields. The most important figure in this hierarchy, second only to the abbot, is the prior. He is effectively the abbot's chief deputy, acting as his direct assistant in all administrative duties. In smaller monasteries, especially those without their own abbot, known as a priory, and under the jurisdiction of an abbot from a larger parent monastery, the prior would be the de facto head of the community. His role is multifaceted. He oversees the monk's daily conduct, manages the internal discipline, and often takes charge when the abbot is absent or indisposed. He's the one who might pull you aside for a quiet word if your chanting is off-key, or if you're caught whispering in the refectory. The prior, in turn, has his own team of inspectors or assistants who are responsible for checking up on the monks on a daily basis. These individuals are like the watchful eyes of the administration, ensuring that the rule is being followed in every corner of the monastery. They might observe your diligence in the scriptorium, your posture during prayer, or your adherence to the rule of silence. It's a constant, gentle surveillance designed to maintain order and piety rather than to catch you out. Unless, of course, you are caught doing something you absolutely shouldn't. Beyond the prior, there are numerous senior monks, sometimes known as obedientaries, because they are specifically appointed to obey the abbot's commands regarding a particular office. Each obedientary has a specific duty, often on a rotational basis, requiring specialized knowledge and considerable responsibility. These roles ensure that every aspect of the monastery, from its spiritual life to its physical infrastructure, is meticulously managed. For example, there's the cellarer, an incredibly important obedientary responsible for the monastery's provisions. He oversees the food stores, manages the kitchen, ensures the quality of the bread and ale, and often handles the monastery's external economic dealings. He's essentially the chief operations officer and procurement manager, balancing the needs of the community with the monastery's economic output. If your meals are good, you have him to thank. If they're a bit monotonous, well, perhaps you still have him to thank. Then there's the sacrist, who is in charge of the church and all its sacred vessels, vestments, and liturgical items. He ensures the altars are prepared, the lamps are lit, and everything is in order for the divine office. He's the guardian of the sacred space, making sure all is ready for your daily encounters with the divine. The precentor is responsible for the liturgy and the monastic choir. He organizes the chants, ensures the monks know their parts, and manages the music. If you have a decent singing voice, you'll be under his direct guidance. He also often oversees the scriptorium and the production of liturgical books, bridging the gap between spiritual practice and intellectual labor. The almonar manages the monastery's charitable work, distributing alms to the poor and caring for the sick and needy in the surrounding community. He is the face of the monastery's compassion, ensuring that the wealth of the institution benefits those less fortunate. And then there's the infirmarian, who looks after the sick monks in the infirmary, dispensing herbal remedies and providing care. He's essentially the monastic doctor, a crucial figure for your physical well-being. Historians still argue whether the division of labor among obedientaries led to greater efficiency or sometimes to internal rivalries and power struggles within the monastic hierarchy. It's a fascinating glimpse into the human dynamics within these seemingly serene communities. 1. Quirky tidbit. The gardener monk might seem a humble role, but his knowledge of herbs for medicine, vegetables for food, and flowers for the altar was incredibly valuable. His domain, the monastery garden, was a vital source of sustenance and healing, a beautiful oasis within the walls. Imagine the gardener quietly tending to his plants, knowing that their growth directly supports the health and well-being of his brothers. These are the unsung heroes of monastic self-sufficiency. Each of these roles, from the highest prior to the most specialized obedientary, contributes to the intricate tapestry of monastic life, ensuring that your journey within the cloister is as ordered and spiritually enriching as possible. With the abbot and his obedientaries meticulously managing the monastery, it's clear that order is paramount. And where there is order, there is a system for maintaining it, leading us to consider punishment and discipline. Life in a monastery, while serene, is not a free. Every monk, from the newest novice to the most senior obedientary, is bound by the rule, and infractions, however small, are noted and addressed. This isn't about cruelty, but about spiritual correction and the preservation of communal harmony. The bedrock of discipline is constant vigilance, and interestingly, a culture of mutual accountability. You quickly learn that telling on one's brothers was seen as a duty, not an act of betrayal. If you observed a fellow monk breaking a rule, perhaps speaking when silence was mandated, arriving late to an office, or showing disobedience, you were expected to report it. This report wouldn't necessarily be a dramatic accusation. Often, it was a quiet word to the prior or the abbot during the daily chapter meeting. This system aimed to correct behavior swiftly and prevent small issues from escalating. Imagine living in a community where everyone is watching, not out of malice, but out of a collective desire for spiritual perfection. It's a very different social contract than you're used to. When a rule was broken, the monk involved was typically reported to the abbot. The punishment, or penance, as it was more often called, varied depending on the severity of the transgression. For minor offenses, the correction might be relatively light. You might be excluded from communal activities for a period, such as being forbidden to sit at the common table in the refectory, instead eating your meals alone on the floor. This public humiliation, the isolation from your brothers, was often a very effective deterrent, hitting at the core of your communal identity. It's like being sent to your room, but your room is a public space, and everyone knows why you're there. More serious infractions, particularly those involving insubordination or repeated disobedience, could lead to more severe physical punishments. While explicit gore was rare, monks could be subjected to beating with rods or switches. This wasn't necessarily brutal torture, but a painful reminder of the physical cost of breaking vows and disrupting the sacred order. Such corporal punishment was not uncommon in medieval society, and monasteries, while aiming for spiritual purity, often reflected the disciplinary norms of their time. Historians still argue about the frequency and severity of these physical punishments, with some sources suggesting they were more symbolic than truly brutal in extreme cases. Usually for grave and persistent defiance of the rule or serious moral failings, a monk could face imprisonment within the monastery. This meant being confined to a solitary cell, often with limited food and no contact with the outside world or even other monks. This was a form of monastic solitary confinement, a last resort to bring a recalcitrant brother back into line, or to remove a disruptive influence from the community. It was a severe form of penance, forcing deep introspection and isolation. The goal of these punishments was always correction and salvation, not just retribution. They were seen as necessary tools to guide the monk back to the path of righteousness, to purify his soul, and to maintain the spiritual integrity of the entire community. Every disciplinary action was framed within the context of spiritual growth, a means to achieve a greater closeness to God through humility and penance. It's a tough love approach, medieval style. One quirky tidbit, sometimes for minor offenses. A monk might be assigned a particularly arduous or unpleasant task as penance, like scrubbing the latrines for a week or being assigned the most disliked manual labor. Imagine having to clean the medieval monastery's equivalent of a public restroom with a smile. Knowing it's for your spiritual betterment, it certainly puts a new spin on chore duty. This rigorous system of discipline, though harsh by modern standards, was integral to the monastic ideal, ensuring that every monk strove for piety and order in every moment of his life. Beyond the formal structures of punishment, there's a more pervasive and subtle form of discipline that shapes your very consciousness, the rule of silence, its purpose. This isn't merely a polite suggestion. It's a fundamental pillar of life, an enforced quietude that permeates every stone and shadow of the monastery. You quickly learn that silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's a presence, a powerful tool for spiritual focus and inner peace. You were generally not allowed to speak at all in such places as the church, kitchen, refectory dining hall, or dormitories. These are communal spaces where distractions are to be minimized, allowing for contemplation, prayer, or focused work. Imagine eating a meal with dozens of other people, yet the only sound is the gentle clinking of bowls or the soft turning of pages by the reader. It creates an atmosphere of profound introspection, turning even the most mundane activities into opportunities for spiritual reflection. It's like a perpetual, very serious library, where the librarians are also your spiritual guides. The purpose of this pervasive silence is multifaceted. Firstly, it's about reducing worldly distractions. Idle chatter, gossip, and unnecessary conversation are seen as impediments to spiritual growth, pulling your mind away from God and towards trivial earthly matters. By removing the opportunity for casual talk, the rule forces you inward, encouraging self-examination and a deeper connection with your spiritual purpose. It's a very effective way to curb the human tendency for constant external stimulation. Secondly, silence fosters communal harmony and humility. Without constant verbal interaction, opportunities for arguments, prideful boasts, or the expression of personal opinions are minimized. This promotes a sense of equality among the brothers and helps to create a unified spiritual atmosphere. You learn to listen more, to observe more, and to communicate through presence rather than words. It's an interesting experiment in human interaction, where body language and subtle gestures become incredibly important. You might be bold enough to attempt a snatch of conversation in the cloisters right after a general meeting, perhaps a brief discussion about the abbot's pronouncements. But besides that indulgence, conversation is to be kept to an absolute minimum. And when it does occur, it is supposed to be strictly restricted to ecclesiastical matters or everyday necessity. No discussing the quality of the last harvest, the latest rumors from the nearest town, or what you'd rather be doing instead of chanting at 2 a.m. It's strictly business, holy business. Furthermore, monks are strictly restricted in who they can talk to. You could only talk to each other, and then, rarely and for specific purposes, as speaking at all to lay brothers and novices was not permitted, let alone to outside visitors of any kind. This extreme isolation from the secular world and even from parts of your own community reinforces the enclosed nature of monastic life. Imagine living side by side with people you cannot speak to, even if they share your daily toil. For this reason, monks developed and often used gestures which they had been taught as novices. This silent language allowed for necessary communication without breaking the rule of silence. You learn to convey requests for tools, food items, or to ask simple questions through specific hand signals. And, as you may recall, sometimes they even whistled rather than speak to a person or in a place they should not, adding a quirky, almost clandestine element to their communication. Historians still argue whether the strictness of silence rules was consistently maintained across all monasteries, or if there were pragmatic allowances for necessary communication, particularly in areas like the kitchen or infirmary where immediate speech might be essential. The quietude becomes a part of you. The external silence fosters an internal one, allowing your mind to calm, to hear the subtle whispers of spiritual insight that might otherwise be drowned out by the clamor of the world. It is a profound, demanding practice, but one that many monks found deeply transformative, allowing them to achieve a greater sense of peace and closeness to the divine. This enforced quiet is your constant companion, a silent discipline that profoundly shapes your inner and outer life. In a community focused on spiritual health, it's inevitable that physical ailments would also arise. This brings us to medicine and infirmary care within the medieval monastery. While your primary focus is the salvation of your soul, the rule of Saint Benedict also emphasizes the importance of caring for the sick, treating them as if they were Christ himself. This meant that monasteries often functioned as centers of healing, not just for their own brothers, but sometimes for the local community as well. Imagine the infirmary, often a quiet wing of the monastery, separate from the main living quarters. To prevent the spread of illness, the air here might carry the scent of herbs, warm broth, and perhaps a faint, lingering odor of sickness. The infirmarian, a dedicated monk, or sometimes a lay brother with knowledge of herbal medicine and basic care, would be in charge. He was essentially the monastic doctor, pharmacist, and nurse, all rolled into one cowled figure. His knowledge was often practical, passed down through generations of monastic experience, rather than theoretical like a university-trained physician. Your care in the infirmary would primarily involve herbal remedies. Monastic gardens, as you might recall from our discussion on agricultural life, were vital sources of medicinal plants. The infirmarian would cultivate a wide array of herbs: chamomile for sleep, mint for digestion, comfrey for wounds, and many others, each with its specific uses. These would be prepared as teas, poultices, salves, or tinctures. It's a very holistic approach, relying on nature's pharmacy. You might find yourself being given a concoction of bitter herbs, guaranteed to taste awful, but hopefully to cure what ails you. Beyond herbs, the care would be basic but compassionate. You'd receive a clean bed, warm blankets, and a diet adapted to your illness. Remember those stricter rules about meat. For the sick, these were often relaxed. Meat, seen as a restorative food, was frequently given to ailing monks to help them regain strength. It's one of the few times you'd see a juicy piece of pork on your plate without it being a major feast day. This practical concession highlights the monastery's commitment to physical well-being. Alongside spiritual rigor, monks suffering from more serious or chronic conditions might reside permanently in the infirmary, receiving continuous care. For illnesses like fevers, fluxes, or infections, the focus was on comfort, cleanliness as much as was understood at the time, and prayer. Surgical interventions were rare and usually limited to very basic procedures performed by barbers who also handled bleeding and tooth extractions. It's safe to say you probably wouldn't want to undergo a major operation in a medieval infirmary, unless absolutely desperate. Monasteries also played a significant role in public health. Many offered basic medical care to the poor and needy from the surrounding villages. They might have a dedicated guest house for the sick, or an outpatient clinic where the infirmarian would see local people. This charitable outreach was a vital service in an age when medical care was scarce and expensive for the common person. The monastery, therefore, wasn't just a place for monks. It was a beacon of healing for the broader community. Historians still argue about the true efficacy of medieval monastic medicine, weighing the practical benefits against the limitations of their scientific understanding. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries even had specific routines for bleeding. Monks, believing it to be a healthy practice for balancing the humors, especially after the heavy diet of winter. Imagine lining up with your brothers, rolling up your sleeve, and getting a ritualistic bloodletting, all in the name of good health and spiritual equilibrium. It certainly puts a new spin on preventative care. So, while your life is one of spiritual striving, the monastery ensures that your physical needs, particularly when you're ill, are met with care and compassion. It's a testament to the holistic vision of monastic life, where the body, as the vessel of the soul, is also deemed worthy of attention and healing. Beyond providing for its own, the monastery also opens its gates, albeit carefully, to the outside world, fulfilling its crucial role in hospitality to travelers. In a medieval landscape often devoid of inns, guest houses, or organized public lodging, monasteries were vital havens, offering food and shelter to pilgrims, merchants, messengers, and even the occasional lost noble. You quickly learn that your enclosed world is not entirely isolated. Imagine you're on duty at the guest house, a separate building usually located near the monastery gates, distinct from the monks' living quarters. This segregation helps maintain the monastic clausura, preventing unnecessary interaction between the monks and the secular world, but still allowing charity to flourish. The guest master, a monk specifically appointed to this duty, would oversee the hospitality, ensuring that visitors were received according to their station and needs. He's the medieval equivalent of a hotel manager, but with far more spiritual duties. When a traveler arrives, weary and dust-covered from their journey, They would be met with a standardized welcome. After a respectful greeting, their feet would often be washed, a symbolic act of humility and service, echoing Christ's washing of his disciples' feet. This act also served a practical purpose. Travelers, especially pilgrims, were often on long, arduous journeys, and a foot bath was a genuine comfort. It's a very polite, if slightly intimate, way to say, "Welcome, you look like you've been walking for weeks." Guests would be offered a meal, often a simple but wholesome one, and a place to sleep. The quality of the food and lodging would depend on the guest's social status. A high-ranking noble might receive a private room with a comfortable bed and a more elaborate meal, perhaps even with wine served in his chamber. A common pilgrim or a poor traveler, however, would likely share a communal dormitory and receive a more basic meal, often in a separate dining area. This stratification, while perhaps jarring to modern sensibilities, was entirely normal in medieval society, reflecting the rigid social hierarchy of the time. Historians still argue about the precise balance between genuine charity and strategic political networking in the monastic practice of hospitality. The duration of stay varied. Pilgrims might stay a night or two before continuing their journey to a saint's shrine or another holy site. Merchants might stay longer if they had business to conduct nearby, or if they were waiting for safer travel conditions. The rule of Saint Benedict actually states that all guests who come to the monastery are to be received as Christ, emphasizing the spiritual significance of this charitable act. This wasn't just good public relations. It was seen as a direct act of devotion. Monasteries often provided more than just food and lodging. They sometimes had rudimentary infirmaries, as you recall, offering basic medical care to sick travelers. They could also serve as safe houses for those fleeing danger, or as postal hubs where messages could be exchanged. In remote areas, they were often the only substantial buildings for miles, making them essential landmarks and points of refuge. It's like a medieval rest stop, combined with a community center and a bit of a hospital. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries had specific rules about how much beer or wine a guest could consume, presumably to prevent drunken revelry that would disturb the monastic peace. Imagine a medieval equivalent of a hotel minibar policy, but enforced by a monk. It shows the fine line they walked between generosity and maintaining their strict spiritual discipline. Your role in this hospitality might be varied. You might assist the guest master, serve meals, or simply maintain your quiet presence, offering a silent example of pious life. This interaction, however limited, provides a window to the outside world, a glimpse of the lives you have chosen to leave behind. It serves as a reminder that even in your enclosed world, your spiritual duties extend beyond the cloister walls, reaching out to those who seek solace, sustenance, or safe passage. Beyond the daily rhythm of prayer, work, and hospitality, your monastery serves another profound purpose. It is a beacon of education and scholarship. In an age where literacy was rare and formal schooling almost non-existent for the general, populous monasteries were the primary intellectual hubs, acting as vital centers for learning and the preservation of knowledge. You are, whether you realize it or not, part of a living library, a custodian of ancient wisdom. Your own education likely began as an oblate or novice, where you were taught the fundamentals: reading, writing, arithmetic, and Latin. Latin, of course, was crucial, as it was the language of scripture, liturgy, and all scholarly texts. You learned to read from the large, handwritten books, your eyes tracing the intricate script, slowly unlocking the secrets held within their pages. You practiced your writing with a quill, painstakingly forming each letter, learning to copy texts accurately. This basic literacy was a privilege enjoyed by very few in medieval society. Imagine the vast majority of people around you living in a world without books, and then stepping into a place where they are meticulously created and studied. Often maintained monastery schools, primarily for their own recruits, oblates, and novices, but sometimes also for a select few boys from noble families, who were not destined for monastic life, but sought a good education. These schools taught not only the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, but also elements of the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, the 7 liberal arts that formed the foundation of medieval education. Your teachers would be learned monks, dedicating their time to passing on knowledge, ensuring that the intellectual flame continued to burn brightly. It's like attending a very exclusive, very quiet, and intensely religious prep school. The scholarly endeavors of monks extended far beyond basic literacy. Many monks engaged in private study and theological research. After the communal work and prayer, you might spend hours in the library, poring over ancient texts, commentaries, and theological treatises. This was a time for individual intellectual growth, for grappling with complex philosophical questions, and for deepening your understanding of faith. Some monks became renowned scholars, their writings and interpretations influencing religious thought across Europe. Perhaps one of the most significant contributions of monastic scholarship was the meticulous copying of books, which you've already experienced in the scriptorium. Before the invention of the printing press, every single book had to be copied by hand. Without the tireless efforts of monks, much of the classical Latin literature, as well as patristic writings and historical chronicles, would have been lost. To us today, they were the human hard drives of the medieval world, tirelessly backing up knowledge. This makes them invaluable records for modern historians, preserving glimpses into medieval life, thought, and history that would otherwise have vanished. Historians still argue about the precise motivations behind the monks' extensive copying efforts. Was it purely preservation, or also a means of disseminating knowledge? Monasteries also produced their own original works, chronicles, histories, biographies of saints vita, and theological commentaries. Many monks were important contributors to the study of history, both then and now. Their detailed records of events, their collections of letters, and their biographical accounts provide precious insights into the medieval world, offering perspectives that no other source can match. Imagine keeping a detailed diary of your community's life, knowing it might be read by scholars centuries later. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries developed incredibly sophisticated methods for annotating and cross-referencing their texts, creating early forms of indexes and concordances. This wasn't just about personal study. It was about making knowledge more accessible to future generations of scholars. It's like creating a medieval Google, one laborious handwritten entry at a time. So, as you pick up your quill for another session in the scriptorium or delve into a dusty tome in the library, remember that you are part of a legacy that extends far beyond your immediate community. You are a guardian of knowledge, a torchbearer of learning in a sometimes dark and illiterate world, ensuring that the wisdom of the past is preserved for the future. Your role in preserving knowledge extends beyond mere copying, as you come to appreciate the immense value of monastic libraries' treasures. These aren't just collections of books. They are veritable vaults of wisdom, storehouses of intellectual heritage that illuminates the past and serve as cornerstones of medieval scholarship. Imagine walking into a room where centuries of human thought, from ancient Greece to your present day, are gathered in tangible form. The monastic library, or armorium, from the Latin word for a chest or cupboard, where books were initially stored, is often located near the scriptorium, facilitating the flow of texts for copying and study. The atmosphere is one of profound quiet, broken only by the soft turning of pages or the gentle creak of wooden shelves. The books themselves are precious objects, often bound in wood and leather, sometimes adorned with metal clasps to protect their valuable contents. Each book represents countless hours of labor, from the preparation of the parchment to the final binding and illumination. You treat them with the utmost reverence, carefully handling each volume as if it were a fragile relic. These libraries housed an astonishing variety of texts. Of course, there were numerous copies of the Bible, often in multiple versions and with extensive commentaries by church fathers. Liturgical books, psalters, missals, breviaries filled many shelves, essential for the daily divine office. But the collection extended far beyond religious texts. You would find works of classical Latin literature by authors like Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero, preserved through the painstaking efforts of generations of monastic scribes, philosophical treatises, historical chronicles, scientific texts on astronomy, medicine, and mathematics, and even practical handbooks on agriculture or craftsmanship were also present. It's like finding a complete academic university library. Decades before universities were a common thing, access to these treasures wasn't unrestricted. Books were valuable and sometimes chained to desks to prevent theft or unauthorized removal. You'd need permission from the librarian monk, often also the precentor, who carefully managed the collection, overseeing its growth, repair, and proper use. He would know the location of every single volume, acting as the monastery's living catalogue. Imagine needing to sign out a book written by Plato, from a monk who probably knows it by heart. The process of building these libraries was slow and continuous. New acquisitions came from various sources: donations from wealthy patrons, exchanges with other monasteries, or the meticulous work of the scriptorium constantly adding new copies and original compositions. Some monasteries became renowned for their particularly rich and extensive collections, drawing scholars from far and wide who sought access to rare texts. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for accumulating such vast libraries was purely academic curiosity or driven by the practical needs of liturgy and theological study. A quirky tidbit about monastic libraries is the presence of chained libraries, where books were literally chained to the desks or shelves. This practice, common in later medieval times and early modern periods, wasn't necessarily a sign of distrust, but a practical measure to protect extremely valuable books and ensure they remained available for communal use within the library, preventing them from being misplaced or damaged. Imagine having to stand or sit at a fixed spot to read a book. Unable to take it away, it certainly discourages casual browse. For you, the monastic library is a profound resource. It is where you deepen your theological understanding, pursue personal scholarly interests, and contribute to the intellectual life of the community. It's a quiet sanctuary of learning, a place where the voices of the past speak directly to you through the enduring power of the written word. In a world where information was scarce, these libraries were indispensable engines of knowledge, ensuring that the wisdom of antiquity and the insights of the Church Fathers would survive the tumultuous tides of history. Your presence within these hallowed halls, turning pages and absorbing knowledge, makes you a vital link in this unbroken chain of scholarship and preservation. Your monastic life, while humble in personal possessions, is surrounded by an undeniable grandeur. This is evident as you turn your gaze towards art and architecture patronage, a sphere where monasteries emerged as colossal forces, not just creating their own works, but also sponsoring artists and architects to embellish their buildings and those of the wider community. Monasteries, you see, were not merely places of worship and study. They were monumental expressions of faith, wealth, and power. The most striking example of this patronage is the very architecture of the monastery itself. From the massive stone churches, often built in the grand Romanesque or later soaring Gothic styles, to the intricate cloisters and chapter houses, every stone and arch was carefully planned and executed. These were not simple structures. They were feats of medieval engineering and artistry, designed to inspire awe and facilitate the monastic way of life. Imagine the sheer scale of the construction. Hundreds of laborers, master masons, and craftsmen toiling for decades, sometimes even centuries, to erect these enduring testaments to faith. Building a new monastery, or even expanding an existing one, was an enormous undertaking, a commitment that spanned generations of monks. Within these impressive buildings, art flourished. You've already experienced the meticulous work of the illuminated manuscripts in the scriptorium. But beyond the pages, monastic patronage extended to stained glass windows, filling the churches with ethereal light and vibrant biblical narratives. These windows were not just decorative, they were didactic tools, teaching the stories of the Bible to a largely illiterate congregation through vivid imagery. You might spend hours gazing at the kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor, shifting with the sun's movement, a constant reminder of divine light. Frescoes and murals adorned the walls of churches, chapter houses, and even refectories, depicting saints, biblical scenes, and moral allegories. Sculpture, both in stone and wood, ornamented doorways, altars, and sarcophagi. Monasteries commissioned elaborate altarpieces, reliquaries, ornate containers for sacred relics, and intricately crafted chalices and liturgical objects from the finest goldsmiths and jewelers. These were not just functional items, they were works of profound beauty, designed to enhance the solemnity of worship and honor God. It's like being surrounded by a living art museum, where every piece serves a sacred purpose. Monasteries were often at the forefront of architectural innovation. For instance, the Cluniac order, known for its immense wealth and influence, built some of the largest and most magnificent churches in Europe, setting architectural trends that spread across the continent. Their desire to create spaces worthy of intense liturgical celebration drove advancements in building techniques and artistic expression. Historians still argue whether the grandeur of some monastic buildings reflected genuine piety or a desire to display wealth and power in a competitive medieval landscape. Beyond their own walls, monasteries also sponsored artists and architects for projects in the wider community. They might fund the construction of local parish churches, bridge building, or contribute to the creation of public fountains. This outreach was another way for monasteries to spread the Christian message and demonstrate their benevolent influence, integrating themselves deeply into the fabric of medieval society. It was a form of medieval philanthropy, often with a clear spiritual return on investment. One quirky tidbit: during the construction of these grand monasteries, medieval builders sometimes incorporated hidden symbols or mason's marks into the stonework. These could be practical identifiers for individual stonemasons or subtle, esoteric symbols whose meanings are now largely lost to time. Imagine a medieval Easter egg hunt for secret symbols hidden within the very walls you live in. It adds a touch of mystery to your ancient abode. So, as you walk through the majestic cloisters or kneel in the awe-inspiring church, you are constantly reminded of the immense artistic and architectural legacy fostered by your monastic predecessors. You are part of an institution that not only preserved knowledge, but also inspired and created some of the most breathtaking works of art and architecture the medieval world ever produced, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape and the human spirit. While much of your monastic life is dedicated to spiritual pursuits and scholarly work, you'll quickly come to appreciate the practical backbone of the community. The lay brothers' essential role. These individuals, though not full monks bound by all the same vows, are absolutely vital to the monastery's self-sufficiency, performing the crucial manual labor that allows the monks to focus on prayer and intellectual endeavors. Think of them as the unsung heroes who keep the lights on and the food coming. Lay brothers, or conversi, as they were sometimes called, were typically men who joined the monastic community later in life, often from a lower social standing than many of the monks, and might not have the same educational background or calling for rigorous scholarly study. They still observed some of the monastic regulations, like attending certain prayers and living a life of piety. But their vows were usually simpler, focusing primarily on stability and obedience to the abbot. Critically, they were not generally tonsured in the same way as monks, maintaining a different, though still distinctive, appearance. Their primary role was to perform the heavy manual labor that was increasingly less appealing or necessary for the professed monks. Particularly, as monasteries grew in wealth and sophistication, you would see them everywhere, diligently working in the fields, forests, and workshops. This included all the demanding agricultural tasks: plowing, sowing, harvesting, and tending to livestock. Without them, the vast monastic estates would simply cease to function efficiently, and the community would quickly go hungry. Imagine a large medieval farm run entirely by scholars and scribes. It wouldn't be very productive, would it? Beyond agriculture, lay brothers were involved in a wide array of other essential tasks. They might be the brewers and winemakers, ensuring a steady supply of beverages safer than water. They could be the bakers, kneading dough and tending the monastery's large ovens daily. They were often the cooks in the kitchen, preparing meals for the entire community. The laundry was another major undertaking, requiring constant washing and mending of habits and linens, a task often relegated to lay brothers. They were also the blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons, and general maintenance crew responsible for building and repairing the monastery's numerous structures. It was basically a medieval handyman service, available 24/7. Lay brothers typically lived in their own separate quarters, often a simpler dormitory or set of rooms distinct from the monks' cloistered areas. While they participated in some communal prayers and meals, their daily schedule was generally more focused on physical labor, and their interaction with the professed monks was limited, often adhering to the same rules of silence in communal spaces. This distinction reinforced the idea that while they were part of the monastic family, their specific calling and duties were different. Historians still argue about the precise social standing of lay brothers within monastic communities, questioning whether their separation was purely practical or also reflected existing social hierarchies. The emergence of a distinct class of lay Brothers became particularly important for orders like the Cistercians, who, despite their emphasis on manual labor for all, eventually grew so large and extensive that they relied heavily on conversy to manage their vast agricultural enterprises. It allowed the choir monks to dedicate more time to the divine office and scholarly pursuits while maintaining the order's ideal of self-sufficiency. One quirky tidbit: some lay brothers, particularly those skilled in crafts, might develop a reputation for their specialized work. Imagine a monastery known throughout the region not just for its piety, but for the exceptionally durable wagons built by its lay brother carpenters, or the delicious cheese produced by its lay brother cheesemakers. Their practical skills directly contributed to the monastery's reputation and economic well-being, making them unsung yet indispensable pillars of the medieval monastic world. Their tireless efforts ensured that the life of prayer and study could continue uninterrupted, providing the very foundation upon which the spiritual and intellectual life of the monastery was built. While you live a life largely removed from the everyday clamor, your monastery is far from an isolated island. Instead, it is deeply intertwined with the world outside its walls, forging complex monasteries and local communities' relationships. These interactions were often reciprocal, sometimes beneficial, and occasionally fraught with tension, reflecting the monastery's unique position as both a spiritual haven and a powerful temporal landowner. The most visible interaction came through the monastery's role as a major landowner and employer. As you know, monasteries owned vast estates, and the people who lived on and worked these lands, the serfs, peasants, and hired laborers, were inextricably linked to the monastic economy. For many, the monastery was their landlord, their judge in local disputes, and the primary market for their surplus produce. This meant that the prosperity of the monastery often directly impacted the well-being of the surrounding villages. A good harvest for the monks usually meant stability for their tenants. Imagine your landlord being a group of silent, prayerful men who also control your entire livelihood. Monasteries also provided essential social services that no other institution could offer in the medieval period. You've seen how they cared for their own sick. This often extended to the local community by providing hospitals, orphanages, and homes for the aged. The monastery almoner would distribute alms to the poor, acting as a crucial safety net in times of hardship. Travelers, as you recall, could find safe lodging and food. These charitable acts generated immense goodwill and solidified the monastery's reputation as a compassionate pillar of the community, earning them widespread respect and continued donations from the faithful. It was a kind of medieval welfare system, but run by people in robes. In terms of education, monasteries sometimes allowed children from local noble families, or even exceptionally bright commoners, to attend their schools, offering opportunities for literacy and advancement that were otherwise unavailable. This intellectual outreach further deepened their integration into the social fabric. However, the relationship wasn't always harmonious. The sheer wealth and land ownership of monasteries could be a source of resentment. Local lords might view a powerful abbot as a rival for influence or resources. Peasants, tied to monastic lands, sometimes chafed under their obligations, leading to disputes over rents, labor services, or rights to common land. There are records of peasant revolts against monastic landlords, highlighting that even spiritual authority had its limits when economic grievances ran deep. Historians still argue about the precise extent of monastic exploitation of their tenants versus their role as benevolent landlords and innovators. Religious disputes could also arise. A local parish priest might feel overshadowed by the grand monastery, or there might be conflicts over tithes and religious jurisdiction. The monks, dedicated to their enclosed life, might sometimes be perceived as aloof or detached from the immediate needs of the villagers, leading to a disconnect despite the charitable works. Despite these occasional tensions, monasteries were fundamentally integrated into their local environment. They were centers of trade, culture, and spiritual guidance. Villagers would attend services in the monastic church on special feast days, participate in monastic processions, and often seek spiritual counsel from the monks. The monastery's presence shaped the very landscape, with monastic farms, mills, and bridges becoming integral parts of the local economy and infrastructure. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries had specific gate alms where daily scraps and leftover food from the refectory were distributed to the poor waiting outside the main gate. This was a visible and tangible sign of their charity, and for many destitute individuals, it provided a vital, if humble, meal. Imagine a daily soup kitchen line, but in front of a 1,000-year-old stone gate, with chanting echoing from within. So, while your life is lived within the monastery walls, the lives of countless others outside are profoundly shaped by its presence. You are part of an institution that provides not just spiritual solace, but also vital social and economic support. A powerful presence in the tapestry of medieval life, constantly interacting with the world it sought to transcend, while the vow of stability binds you to the monastery for life. There were rare circumstances where a monk might contemplate, and even attempt, leaving monastic life. This was not a common occurrence, nor was it lightly undertaken, as your vows were seen as a lifelong commitment to God. However, the medieval period, despite its rigid structures, did allow for occasional exceptions and avenues for departure. The most straightforward path for leaving was available to those who had not yet taken their solemn, final vows. If you were an oblate, a child offered to the monastery, or a novice, someone in their probationary year, rules that developed from the 13th century CE allowed you to freely leave a monastery upon reaching maturity. This was a significant shift, recognizing that a commitment made in childhood or during an initial testing period might not be suitable for a fully mature individual. So, if your adolescent self decided that 2 a.m. wake-up calls and enforced silence weren't your lifelong calling, you had an exit strategy. This was a pragmatic acknowledgement that not everyone was suited for the monastic path, and it was better for the community to have truly committed members rather than resentful ones. For a professed monk, one who had taken the full vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience for life, leaving was a far more serious matter, akin to breaking a sacred contract with God. Such an act was considered a grave sin and a scandal. However, there were a few rare circumstances under which a monk might be permitted to leave. One such circumstance was a dispensation from the Pope. This was exceptionally rare and usually granted only for compelling reasons, such as a monk needing to take over a crucial family role due to unforeseen circumstances, for example, being the last surviving male heir to a noble house. A very fringe tidbit, but it did happen. Even then, it would require significant petitions, influence, and evidence of genuine necessity, and often involved a substantial payment or donation to the church. It wasn't like submitting a resignation letter. It was more like applying for a divine pardon. Another, more tragic reason for leaving, or rather, being expelled, was due to serious misconduct or persistent defiance of the rule. As you recall, From our discussion on discipline, serious infractions could lead to excommunication or forced removal from the monastery. While this meant leaving the monastic life, it was not a voluntary departure and would carry immense social and spiritual stigma. A monk expelled for grave offenses would find himself an outcast, often without family support or means of livelihood. Facing a harsh and uncertain future in the secular world he had once renounced, sometimes a monk might simply flee the monastery, becoming an apostate. This was a dangerous and desperate act. They would be pursued by monastic authorities and often shunned by society, unable to integrate back into a world that viewed them as oathbreakers. Their spiritual fate was also considered dire. It's a stark reminder that while the gates were open for entry, they were largely metaphorical iron bars for exit. Historians still argue about the true frequency of monks leaving or fleeing monasteries. As such, records are often incomplete or biased. The decision to leave, even if permitted, was emotionally and spiritually complex. You would be severing ties with your community, your spiritual family, and renouncing a life structured around the pursuit of salvation. For many, the idea of returning to the chaotic, uncertain world outside the cloister walls would be daunting, if not terrifying. The monastery, despite its rigors, provided a sense of security, purpose, and belonging that was hard to replicate elsewhere. So, as you go about your daily routine, you are constantly reminded of the profound commitment you have made. The choice to remain is renewed every morning with the sound of the bell, every chanted prayer, and every shared meal. The possibility of leaving, while technically present for some, is a distant thought for most, overshadowed by the spiritual purpose and communal life that now define your existence. As you deepen your understanding of monastic life, you must also confront its less spiritual, often darker side, wealth and corruption. While the ideal of monasticism was rooted in poverty and simplicity, the reality for many medieval monasteries was one of accumulating immense wealth, which, as often happens, could lead to a departure from their foundational principles and sometimes outright corruption. Monasteries, as you recall, became incredibly wealthy institutions. This wealth stemmed from various sources: vast landholdings often given through pious donations or acquired over centuries, tax exemptions, and the sale of agricultural surplus and manufactured goods like fine ale or cheese. They were also recipients of constant donations from wealthy patrons seeking spiritual merit or prayers for their souls. Imagine a modern charitable organization that also owns vast tracts of land and operates thriving businesses. That's a monastery, with more chanting. This accumulation of assets meant that while individual monks lived humbly, the institution itself could be incredibly rich, sometimes wealthier than local secular lords. This immense wealth, while ensuring the monastery's stability and capacity for charity and scholarship, also presented a significant temptation and a source of potential corruption. The very security that attracted recruits could also lead to a decline in spiritual fervor. When a monastery was too rich, monks might become complacent. The rigorous discipline might slacken, and the focus could shift from spiritual devotion to the comfortable enjoyment of institutional prosperity. It's like winning the lottery, and then forgetting why you started working in the first place. One common form of corruption was the relaxation of the rule. Instead of strictly adhering to simple food, basic accommodation, and limited possessions, some monasteries indulged in more luxurious living. You might hear whispers of monks in particularly wealthy houses enjoying richer diets, perhaps with more meat than officially permitted, or having private, more comfortable cells furnished with items beyond the basic necessities. The vow of poverty, while upheld individually, might become diluted institutionally. This was a particular concern that led to reform movements, like the Cistercians, who explicitly sought to return to a harsher, simpler life. Nepotism and simony were also potential issues. Powerful abbots, often with connections to noble families, might favor relatives for positions within the monastery, or use their influence to secure lucrative external positions for them. Simony, the buying or selling of ecclesiastical privileges, was a constant struggle within the medieval church, and monasteries were not immune. An abbessy, being a position of immense power and wealth, could become a highly coveted office, sometimes even bought through backroom deals. Historians still argue about the true prevalence of simony within medieval monasteries, as proof is often anecdotal and difficult to verify. The vast temporal power wielded by abbots could also lead to involvement in secular politics, drawing them away from their spiritual duties. Abbots might engage in land disputes with neighboring lords, attend royal courts, or even raise troops for feudal service, blurring the lines between their sacred office and worldly concerns. This political entanglement often diverted resources and attention from the core monastic mission. It's a bit like your spiritual leader also being a corporate CEO and a regional governor, trying to balance all three. Another insidious form of corruption was the practice of pluralism, where one individual held multiple church offices, including abbacies, simultaneously, drawing income from each without necessarily fulfilling the duties. Or absenteeism, where an abbot rarely visited his monastery, leaving it to be run by subordinates while he enjoyed the comforts of court life elsewhere. These practices severely undermined monastic discipline and spiritual leadership. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries, to raise funds, would sometimes sell the right for wealthy individuals to retire within their walls, not as monks, but as lay residents, enjoying the security and amenities of the monastic life without taking vows. These individuals, sometimes called Herodians, might live in private apartments within the monastic complex, dine with the monks, and receive spiritual benefits, effectively buying a luxurious retirement plan. It's like a medieval version of a luxury retirement community, nestled within the sacred cloister. So, while you strive for personal piety, you are acutely aware that the very institution you belong to, despite its noble ideals, is not immune to the corrupting influence of wealth and power. It's a constant tension, a reminder that even the most sacred of callings can be challenged by the temptations of the material world. The inevitable consequence of wealth and the subsequent potential for corruption was the periodic, zealous drive for monastic reforms and orders. Throughout the medieval period, the monastic ideal, though powerful, was constantly challenged by its own success. When monasteries grew too rich or too lax, passionate monks and influential figures would rise up, calling for a return to the stricter, purer, and more ascetic life envisioned by the rule of Saint Benedict. These reform movements led to the creation of new monastic orders, each seeking to refine and restore the original spiritual fervor. One of the earliest and most influential reform movements originated at the monastery of Cluny in Burgundy, France. Starting in the early 10th century CE, the Cluniac reform sought to free monasteries from secular interference, placing them directly under papal authority. They emphasized a highly centralized structure, with daughter houses remaining dependent on the mother abbey of Cluny. They also placed a renewed emphasis on the elaborate liturgy, solemn chanting, and intercessory prayer, believing that constant, beautiful worship was the monk's most important duty. While Cluny eventually became incredibly wealthy and powerful, it initially represented a powerful drive for spiritual renewal, and its influence spread across Europe like wildfire. Imagine an entire spiritual empire built on the principle of impeccable prayer services. However, as Cluny itself grew immensely wealthy and its liturgical practices became increasingly elaborate, sometimes bordering on ostentatious, new voices emerged, arguing that the Cluniacs had deviated too far from the Benedictine ideal of manual labor and simplicity. This led to the rise of the Cistercian order in the late 11th century CE, founded at Quito. The Cistercians explicitly sought to return to the strict, unadorned interpretation of the rule of Saint Benedict. They emphasized a rigorous ascetic life, simplicity in architecture and liturgy, and a renewed focus on manual labor, particularly in agriculture. They built their monasteries in remote, uncultivated areas, literally turning wilderness into productive farmland through their own hard work. The legendary Bernard of Clairvaux became the most famous Cistercian, a fiery preacher whose charisma drew countless new recruits to the order. It's like a medieval back-to-basics movement, but with more sheep and fewer organic kale smoothies. Later centuries saw further diversification and reform movements. The Carthusians, founded in the late 11th century, pushed for an even more solitary and austere monastic life than the Benedictines or Cistercians. They lived largely as hermits within a communal setting, each monk having his own cell and garden, coming together only for communal prayers. Their commitment to silence and isolation was legendary, making them one of the strictest monastic orders. Imagine living in a shared compound where you barely see or speak to your neighbors. That's Carthusian life. Then there were the mendicant orders, like the Franciscans founded by Saint Francis of Assisi in the early 13th century, and the Dominicans, founded by Saint Dominic in the early 13th century. Unlike the traditional monastic orders, which were primarily focused on life within the cloister and self-sufficiency, the mendicants were begging orders. Mendicant means begging who lived among the people, owned no property, and relied entirely on charity. Their mission was to preach, teach, and combat heresy, actively engaging with the secular world rather than retreating from it. This was a radical shift, injecting monastic energy directly into urban centers. Historians still argue whether the mendicant orders represented a natural evolution of monasticism or a distinct revolutionary departure from its traditional contemplative ideals. One quirky tidbit: the Cistercians, in their pursuit of simplicity, famously rejected elaborate stained glass windows in their churches, opting instead for clear, uncolored glass. This was a deliberate ascetic choice, reflecting their desire to avoid worldly distractions and focus on inner contemplation. Imagine a medieval church without the usual kaleidoscope of colored light. It certainly makes a strong visual statement about their priorities. These waves of reform and the emergence of new orders demonstrate the dynamic nature of medieval monasticism. It was a constant struggle to balance spiritual ideals with practical realities, to prevent complacency, and to ensure that the monastic life remained a vibrant and relevant path to salvation in a changing world. And as you go about your duties, you are a direct inheritor of these ongoing spiritual battles, striving to uphold the enduring, yet ever-challenged, monastic ideal. As you reflect on the long, intricate history of monasticism, from its desert origins to its various reforms, you begin to grasp the enduring legacy today. While the medieval world has faded into the annals of history, the impact of Your life reverberates far beyond the ancient cloisters, shaping aspects of the modern world in ways you might never have imagined. Perhaps the most obvious legacy lies in spiritual and religious continuity. Monastic orders, including Benedictines, Cistercians, Franciscans, and Dominicans, still exist today, observing many of the same rules and daily routines that governed your life centuries ago. They continue to be places of prayer, contemplation, and dedicated service, drawing individuals who seek a life of spiritual depth amidst the clamor of the modern world. If you were to visit a monastery today, even in Vietnam or anywhere else in the world, you would recognize much of the fundamental rhythm and purpose, albeit perhaps with a bit more electricity and considerably fewer quill pens. Beyond the purely spiritual, monasteries played a crucial role in the preservation of knowledge and culture. As you experienced in the scriptorium and library, monks meticulously copied, preserved, and studied ancient texts, both sacred and secular. Without their tireless efforts, much of the classical literature, philosophy, and scientific knowledge of antiquity would have been lost during the tumultuous early Middle Ages. They were the unsung heroes who safeguarded Western civilization's intellectual heritage. Every time you read a classical text, or benefit from knowledge passed down through the centuries, you are, in a very real sense, indebted to the monks who painstakingly copied those words by hand. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which monasteries saved classical learning versus simply preserving what was already present in fragmented forms. Monasteries also made significant contributions to agriculture and land management. They pioneered new farming techniques, managed large estates efficiently, and often transformed unproductive land into fertile farms. Many modern agricultural practices have roots in the innovations developed within monastic communities. They were early adopters and innovators in rural development, shaping the very landscape of medieval Europe. So, the efficient farm down the road might, in some distant way, owe a nod to your brothers. Think too of the arts and architecture. The grand cathedrals and monastic complexes that still stand today are breathtaking testaments to medieval artistry and engineering, many of which were directly commissioned or built by monastic orders. The tradition of illuminated manuscripts, too, inspired later forms of book design and illustration. The aesthetic influence of monastic art is still visible in churches, museums, and even in modern design. It's a pretty profound thought that the stained glass window in a church you visit today might be conceptually descended from the very ones you helped to commission, even in something as mundane as food and drink. The monastic legacy endures. Many traditional European beers, wines, and cheeses have their origins in monastic recipes and brewing traditions. The emphasis on quality, craftsmanship, and long-term production developed in monasteries laid the groundwork for entire industries. So, that craft beer you enjoy might have a very distant, very pious cousin still being brewed within monastery walls today. Furthermore, monasteries provided a model for organized communal living and administration. The detailed rules, the hierarchy of roles, and the emphasis on self-sufficiency and communal welfare offered a blueprint for large-scale organization that influenced later secular institutions. They were early examples of well-run, complex organizations, even if their primary goal was spiritual. One quirky tidbit: the precise timekeeping necessary for the divine office led to the development and refinement of mechanical clocks. Monasteries were among the first places to adopt and improve these devices, needing accurate time to ring the bells for their services. So, Your precise schedule inadvertently contributed to the invention of the very device that helps you manage your day-to-day. The daily life you lived, with its blend of prayer, labor, and study, was not just a personal spiritual journey. It was a vital engine that preserved knowledge, fostered innovation, provided social welfare, and profoundly shaped the cultural and intellectual landscape of the Western world. Your quiet dedication, centuries ago, still echoes in the bustling world of today. As the medieval sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cloister, your journey through the daily life of a monk draws to a close. But before you drift into the monastic peace, there's one final, inevitable reality to consider. A monk's final rest. For you, death is not an ending to be feared, but a passage, the ultimate fulfillment of your earthly vows, leading to the eternal rest you've tirelessly sought. In the monastery, death is not a solitary affair. When a monk falls gravely ill, he is moved to the infirmary, where he receives constant care from the infirmarian and spiritual comfort from his brothers. The community would gather around him, chanting prayers and psalms, preparing his soul for its final journey. It is a shared vigil, a collective act of love and support as one of their own transitions from this life. Imagine being surrounded by the hushed, comforting voices of your brothers, their prayers guiding you towards peace. Upon his passing, the monk's body would be prepared for burial with simplicity and reverence. He would be washed, dressed in his habit, the same humble garments he wore in life, and perhaps laid out on a bier in the church for a period, allowing the community to pay their final respects. There would be no elaborate coffin. Often he would be wrapped in a shroud, mirroring the simplicity of his life. This final act of dressing in the habit reinforces the idea that he died as he lived, a devoted servant of God, bound by his vows. The burial itself would typically take place within the monastery cemetery, often located within the cloister, garth, the central courtyard, or in a dedicated burial ground just outside the church. The graves were simple, often marked by a plain stone or wooden cross, sometimes with just the monk's name and the date of his death. There were no grand monuments or elaborate epitaphs, reflecting the humility and equality of monastic life. In death as in life, everyone, from the lowliest lay brother to the most esteemed abbot, would eventually rest in the same sacred ground. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of monastic burials was primarily a reflection of their vow of poverty or a theological statement about equality in death. The burial service itself would be solemn and dignified, filled with prayers, readings from scripture, and chants for the repose of the soul. The community would process to the graveside, the rhythmic chanting echoing across the quiet grounds. It's a poignant moment, a stark reminder of the transience of earthly life and the enduring promise of eternal salvation. You would stand with your brothers, silently committing another soul to God's embrace, knowing that one day they would do the same for you. For the departed monk, his final rest was not merely the end of his physical existence. It was the moment of ultimate fulfillment, the culmination of a lifetime dedicated to spiritual pursuit. The prayers of his surviving brothers would continue, ensuring his soul's journey through purgatory and into the beatific vision. Their collective spiritual merits, earned through countless hours of prayer and labor, were believed to benefit all members of the community, both living and dead. It's a beautifully interwoven spiritual economy where even in death, you remain connected to your brethren. One quirky tidbit: some monasteries would bury their deceased monks directly in the earth without a coffin, sometimes even reusing the same grave plots after a certain period. This was often done not out of disrespect, but as an ultimate act of humility and a literal return to the earth, echoing the biblical dust to dust. It certainly puts a new spin on minimalist funerals. And now, as the last echoes of prayer fade, and the silence of the monastic night truly settles, you can feel the profound peace that defines this final chapter. Your journey through the daily life of a medieval monk is complete. You have risen with the bells, toiled in the fields, copied sacred texts, and chanted countless prayers. You have lived a life of rigorous discipline, profound purpose, and unwavering faith. The very air around you seems to hum with centuries of devotion, a comforting blanket of spiritual tranquility, the soft rustle of invisible robes, the faint scent of old parchment and beeswax, the distant memory of chanted psalms. These gentle sensations now invite you to let go. Allow the quiet dedication of these ancient souls to wash over you, smoothing away the day's concerns. Feel the deep, enduring peace of the cloister settling in your mind, easing you into a gentle, restful calm. Your own world, so loud and demanding, can wait. For now, simply exist in this quiet space, surrounded by centuries of devotion, wrapped in the profound silence of a monk's final, peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams.